do you call Mac OS the XNU operating system? XNU is the name of the kernel of Mac OS. So, what is a kernel? What is an operating system? That is the question that is at the core of the GNU Linux naming controversy. People cannot agree on what it means for something to be an operating system. Well, I say the distinction between the terms operating system and kernel should exist. There is a reason these two are different things and they should stay that way. So, let's begin. What is an operating system? An operating system is the lowest level collection of software that allows the user to do their computing. What does this mean? Well, basically, an operating system needs to have the ability to run arbitrary programs that the user chooses. The operating system needs to provide to the user the ability to interact with the operating system, interact with the computer through the operating system. The operating system is the one that gives the user that ability. So, interact with the computer by the use of the operating system. Yes, that's how you say it. So, the operating system needs to provide the inputs and outputs for the user that are required to interact with the computer. The user can send the commands to the computer to have the computer do what the user wants. The operating system also provides any necessary APIs and system calls and things like that to programs that run on the computer, so that the programs can access things like file systems. So basically, an operating system is the component, no, not a component, the collection of software that makes the computer usable. It is the environment in which the user can run the programs that they want, and the programs themselves can also interact with the operating system to make things happen easier and be compatible with other software. Like, instead of having each software have its own file system and all that, instead of that you can make many different programs that are all compatible with the operating system, and the programs can use the resources of the operating system. So the operating system is both for the user to interact with the computer and for those programs running on the operating system to use the operating system as a resource. It can utilize the programs, they can utilize the operating system and the computer's hardware. And this is all done by the operating system. The operating system is the software environment that allows the user to do everything they want. So, with that in mind, what is a kernel then? Well, a kernel is a component of the operating system. The operating system I just described more like, whatever. Anyway, that operating system I just talked about, a kernel is a component, a part of that operating system, a part that specifically deals with the very specific areas that a kernel is supposed to deal with. So this is basically the core of the operating system. It handles the lowest levels of the operating system, the ones that are closest to the hardware, and it runs in the highest privilege mode on the system. Basically, it does all the things that operating system would do at their core. The most closest thing to the hardware, to the metal, as they say. So, switching programs, scheduling, file systems, whatever, drivers and all the hardware things, memory mapping and protected memory things, and communications with I/O devices, and all these low-level things. That's what the kernel does. It is a specific component of the operating system that does all that stuff. So basically it handles those things. It's a component of the operating system. because the operating system I just defined earlier, that requires the functions of a kernel. But it's not only a kernel that it requires the operating system. The operating system needs more than a kernel. But the kernel is indeed a part of the operating system, and it is required for the operating system to do its purpose, to serve its purpose. Now, where does then the controversy come in when people say that the Linux kernel is an operating system, and they say that the GNU Linux operating system should not be called a GNU system. They say it's just Linux because Linux is an operating system to them. Well, I have many other speeches where I explain the reasoning and my theories as to why people say that. So I'm not gonna get into that now. You can pause this speech and go listen to those other speeches. I have many of them where I explain why I think many people call it Linux instead of GNU Linux. GNU plus Linux, GNU slash Linux. Yeah, I'm not gonna explain that now. So, not now, not in this speech. This speech is specifically about what is an operating system. So, then, now with that out of the way, let's see. What are examples of operating systems and kernels and such? Well, okay. FreeBSD. FreeBSD is an example of a complete operating system. FreeBSD provides the user with all the functionalities that I described earlier that an operating system should have. It provides the relevant inputs and outputs to the user so that they can interact with the computer, they can run arbitrary programs, they can start their programs and program their own programs, and the operating system provides resources to the software running on the system, they can access the file systems. A FreeBSD provides a complete operating system environment. The environment in which the user can do their computing. If it wasn't for the entire FreeBSD operating system environment, the computer would just be a block of metal. It doesn't do anything on its own. Now, what about then? What then would you say? Well, what happens if you have can anything be an operating system if you just have the computer start the software and the computer just runs the software? Can anything be an operating system if you just run it at the lowest level? If you have a bootloader that just loads some software program, is that an operating system? Well, no. See, here's the thing. Super Mario Bros. Is not an operating system. The Nintendo Entertainment System may load Super Mario Bros. As the software from the ROM in the highest privilege mode or whatever. The Nintendo Entertainment System probably doesn't have any privileged, unprivileged things in the processor, but regardless, it runs the game straight from the ROM, basically. So is the Super Mario Bros. An operating system because it's run directly by the hardware like that? Well, no, that it's not an operating system because it doesn't provide the user with all the functionalities of an operating system. It doesn't give the user the environment in which they can arbitrarily run arbitrary programs perhaps. It doesn't give the user inputs and outputs that are necessary to start those programs and interact with the programs. It doesn't give resources to the programs running. There aren't even any programs running other than just a game. So merely having a software run on the computer doesn't make it an operating system. So it's not enough that the computer boots and starts running something. The first thing it runs is not an operating system. No, an operating system is a very specific thing. It provides the user with specific things. Let's see. What are examples of kernels then? Well, I have already mentioned one kernel at the very beginning of this speech. XNU. Now, XNU is the name of the kernel that Mac OS uses. But I rarely hear people say that Mac OS is an XNU operating system. In fact, I don't recall I have ever heard a single time anyone ever say that. And you know why? Because the people who say that the Linux kernel is an operating system, they have a double standard. It's only the Linux kernel that is an operating system. No other kernel is an operating system, only the Linux kernel is an operating system. Because those people are stupid and they have their stupid ideas as I've described in other speeches. I'm not gonna get into that anymore now. You can go listen to the other speeches. So, XNU is a kernel. XNU does the low-level stuff that a kernel does. The lowest levels. It does the process scheduling and all the memory things, you know, listing all the functions of the kernel is not really what I'm here for, what this speech is supposed to be for, so I'm not gonna do it anymore. But anyway, XNU is a kernel. It does what a kernel does. You can use the XNU kernel in an operating system like Mac OS. But you can also use it in the next operating system, which was basically the base and the derivative, or rather, Mac OS is the derivative of the next operating system. It was originally used there, but you could reuse them. You could use the XNU kernel in other operating systems also. You would need to modify the operating system extensively to make it run on a different kernel, but it can be done. And this is done with many things. You see, there are cases where people take different operating system kernels and put them in other operating systems. Good example of this is Debian. People have made Debian GNU operating system, the Debian variant of the GNU operating system, run on various kernels, at least four different kernels Debian has run on. Now, how officially are they called Debian or not, that's not important. One of them wasn't even called Debian, but it was technically Debian. So, what are the kernels? Well, there is the GNU's own kernel herd. So Debian has run on the herd kernel. Then there's of course notably the very popular Linux kernel. Debian has been made to run on the Linux kernel. So Debian GNU/Linux is the specific version of Debian that runs on the Linux kernel. But there are also two other ones that are less known. Not many people are aware of these, but there are even more examples. In fact, there are two more. There is Debian GNU/K-FreeBSD. This is the variant of Debian that runs on the FreeBSD's kernel. So you take from the FreeBSD operating system that I talked about earlier, you take the kernel out of it. So the complete FreeBSD operating system includes a kernel. You take only the kernel and leave rest of the operating system behind. You have that kernel and you implement the Debian GNU operating system with that FreeBSD kernel. So then you get a Debian GNU/K-FreeBSD out of that. K-FreeBSD stands for, or the K in K-FreeBSD stands for kernel of. So GNU/kernel of FreeBSD. So K-FreeBSD, that's their naming convention there. Anyway, so that is a Debian GNU variant that runs on the FreeBSD kernel. But there's even one more. There is this operating system that was called Dyson OS. I've made a video on that where I install it, but it doesn't work quite well because it has gone out of support. The repositories aren't working anymore because the operating system isn't supported anymore. But still, that's not relevant. What's relevant is that it is an operating system, and had it been supported when I made the video, it would have run just fine, and I could have done all the computing on it. So the technology works just fine. It's just a matter of, do people support it and provide it with all the repositories of software that are necessary to have it running. Anyway, Dyson OS takes the Debian GNU operating system and implements it on, drumroll, the Illumos kernel from OpenSolaris. You take the variant of OpenSolaris that was made into Illumos because Oracle bought the Sun Microsystems and then they terminated the OpenSolaris project. Well, people fortunately took that OpenSolaris project and renamed it basically Illumos, and with that stuff, that Illumos stuff, which basically derives from one of those original Unix systems. So like you take one of those operating systems, the Illumos system, and there's the kernel. So that's like an authentic Unix kernel. That's pretty cool. But anyway, you take that kernel, and that can be made to run on the GNU operating system also. Or rather, maybe you can make the GNU operating system run on the kernel. Actually, it doesn't really make... Actually, it's not really valid to say that the GNU operating system runs on the kernel or that the kernel runs on the operating system. Because really, it's the combination of the both. They both complete a whole. So neither of them runs on the other. No, instead both of them combine into one thing that runs. So, anyway, GNU / Illumos maybe. I don't know what it's called actually, because like I said, that variant of Debian was actually called Dyson OS, and it wasn't at all any official version of Debian. So it wasn't called Debian at all, it was Dyson OS, so that's interesting, but that's just the names. Who cares about the names? We are talking about technology here. The names are not important, as in, what do you call that operating system? Is it Dyson or Debian? So that's what I mean by saying that names are not important. What I mean is that it doesn't matter if you call it Debian or Dyson OS. Anyway, that's not important if it's called Dyson OS. It is a Debian clone. It runs Debian software. Basically, Dyson OS, it provides like a complete Debian environment, or at least that was the plan, and it was quite successful as far as I'm aware. But I just couldn't get it installed anymore because the software repositories weren't working anymore. Anyway, had the repositories been available, I could have installed software and run all kinds of things and use the operating system. But anyway, Dyson OS, it takes the Debian and implements that on the Illumos kernel. And isn't that just so cool? The GNU operating system can be made run on just about any Unix-like kernel out there. Really, you can take any thing and you can just any kernel and you can just make it run with the GNU operating system. And that's because a kernel is a component of an operating system. And due to the way these operating systems are designed, these Unix-like systems, and the fact that there are so many of them, different types of Unix systems, a lot of these components, to a large extent, although it requires a lot of work and it's something that not everyone can just do, but it can be done. You can interchangeably just take a kernel from one thing and put it on another. You can take the kernel from FreeBSD and make it run with Debian GNU, and you can take the Illumos kernel and make it run with Debian, and you can take GNU's herd kernel and make a complete GNU operating system with a Debian variant of it. So, yeah. And you can even take Linux and make Linux run with the GNU operating system. Linux can also run on other operating systems. You can make different operating systems using the Linux kernel that are not GNU operating systems. Just like you can take the let's see. Well, the Illumos kernel, for example, you can have the Illumos kernel and you can use it in the GNU operating system or any other operating system or the FreeBSD, and there are components. FreeBSD's kernel is a component of FreeBSD. It's a part of FreeBSD, but it doesn't have to be exclusively in FreeBSD. Other operating systems can also use it. GNU also has its own kernel, herd. It's just not very popular and widely used, but that's irrelevant. It can be used, and it can be used. It makes an operating system, so popularity is irrelevant. One would be very stupid if they thought that the popularity matters in any way. Anyway, you can take any of the kernels. I mean, in theory, you could just as well have some sort of an open Solaris-like system that runs on GNU herd. Or you could have FreeBSD be modified to run on the Illumos kernel, or you could have FreeBSD modified to run on the Linux kernel, or any other kernel. You know, it's arbitrary. You can take these components and interchange them. So there is a difference between an operating system and a kernel. An operating system is the complete system. So let's see. Then the question is GNU an operating system? Well, okay, let's get into that. The GNU project, the project that develops the GNU operating system, that itself is not an operating system. It's just a project, an effort, an organization, and such things. You know, it's an organization, a project to develop the operating system, okay? So what is the GNU operating system? What is the software they develop? Let's see. So, operating system as defined as the collection of software that allows the user to do their computing and provides the environment in which they can do so, and all the inputs and outputs and the abilities to run the programs and the environments, the resources to the programs and everything. The operating system is GNU an operating system? Well, yes, but here's the thing. There is no the GNU operating system. Rather, there are many different variants of GNU operating systems, because of the nature of the source code being publicly available and usable. Anyone can take the GNU software and make their own GNU operating system. So that's why there is no the GNU operating system, because there are many GNU operating systems. There are many a GNU operating systems, because anyone can take the GNU software and make their own GNU operating system. So therefore, every GNU distro, every distribution of the GNU operating system, it is a GNU operating system. It may be a different type and a different modification than other GNU operating systems, but it is a GNU operating system. It is a GNU operating system. Look at, let's say Debian GNU/herd. Although that is incorrectly titled, Debian GNU/herd should not be called Debian GNU/herd. It should be called just Debian GNU. But yeah, anyway, Debian GNU with its own herd kernel, that is a variant of the GNU operating system. Specifically, the Debian variant, because the Debian people, they took the GNU software and made an operating system, an implementation of the GNU operating system. With that software, they made a complete GNU operating system, as a matter of fact, because it uses the GNU, because it uses all the GNU software, it uses the kernel and all the other software, so that is a complete GNU operating system. But it is not the GNU operating system, because there are many possibilities. Anyone can make a GNU operating system, a complete GNU operating system. Let's look at GUIX, for example. The GUIX system, the people behind it, they offer a variant of or rather, they offer a different version of GUIX with the herd kernel instead of Linux. So the GUIX GNU system with its own kernel herd, that is also a GNU operating system, a complete GNU operating system. So both Debian GNU and the GUIX system GNU, both of those are a GNU operating system. There is no the GNU operating system. Because Debian GNU operating system with its own kernel Herd, that is a GNU operating system just like the GUIX system that runs GNU software exclusively, basically. They are both GNU. So, there are many GNU operating systems out there. No one the GNU operating system. Anyway, so then, what about the Linux situation? What happens with the Linux situation? Well, if Debian GNU/Herd, although incorrectly titled, so if that's a complete GNU operating system, what is Debian GNU/Linux then? Well, Debian GNU/Linux is another GNU operating system. It's a different type of GNU operating system. It's a GNU/Linux type operating system. You see, it is the combination of GNU and Linux. So it is not a complete GNU operating system. One could compare this to, think of, let's say, FreeBSD. You take out FreeBSD's kernel and you replace it with Linux. So that is now a FreeBSD Linux operating system. You have now made a FreeBSD Linux operating system. That is what Debian GNU/Linux basically is. It is the GNU operating system, or rather a GNU operating system, as explained just earlier. It is a GNU operating system that runs Linux instead of Herd. Let's put it this way. Because FreeBSD, there is really only one FreeBSD, there aren't many different FreeBSDs. There could be many different FreeBSDs, but that's not important. What's important is that because you have a FreeBSD system, if you take out the component that is the kernel and you replace it with Linux, it doesn't cease to be a FreeBSD system. It now becomes something else, something new, something different, something that hasn't existed before. It is now a FreeBSD Linux operating system. But is it still a FreeBSD operating system? Well, kind of yes. Pretty much it is still a FreeBSD system. It's just a weird version of it. It's just a bizarre implementation, but it is still a FreeBSD operating system. Similarly, GNU plus Linux systems, such as Debian GNU/Linux, it is a GNU operating system, just like the FreeBSD Linux would still be a FreeBSD operating system. It's just kind of weird and modified to run with a different kernel. So, what part of the operating system then matters for the name? Is it still FreeBSD if you replace the kernel with Linux? Well, it's not the FreeBSD anymore, but it is still a FreeBSD. It's just a modified FreeBSD. So something like FreeBSD plus Linux would be an appropriate name. And the same applies to any other system. If you take the Illumos kernel and you use that with the Debian operating system, the Debian GNU system, it becomes something like Debian GNU plus Illumos. Or GNU/Illumos. The plus or slash isn't too important. Anyway, let's see. So, So, the Apple's Mac OS, it uses the XNU kernel. You could take the XNU kernel from the Mac OS operating system and you could use it on any of the other Unix-like systems. And that would work all the same as with any of the other kernels that I've talked about earlier. An operating system. Yeah. I'm tired, I'm gonna stop this bit now.